She kneels at the hearth and scrapes the pale gray ash into a wooden bucket with both hands. Oak ash, beech ash. The hardwoods burn best for this, and she's been saving it for weeks. Softwood ash from pine or fir is weaker. It works, but not nearly as well. Most women who have done this before know the difference by color and texture alone. The ash goes into a tall wooden barrel near the back of the yard, packed down tight between layers. It has to stay dry. Moisture starts leaching the useful salts out before she's ready for them. The barrel has a small hole bored near the bottom, with a thick pad of straw pressed flat on the inside to act as a crude filter. Simple, effective. She lifts a clay jug of rainwater and pours it slowly over the top of the packed ash. Rainwater is better than well water. Fewer minerals to interfere with the chemistry, though she wouldn't have used that word. The water disappears into the gray ash. She waits. Beneath the barrel, a bucket catches whatever drips out. What eventually comes through is a dark brownish liquid, raw lye. It has a harsh, acrid smell and feels slippery between the fingers, almost oily. That slickness is the sign she's looking for. If the first run is too weak, she pours it right back over the ash and lets it drip through a second time. Some women pour it through a completely fresh barrel of ash for extra strength. To test it, she lowers an egg into the liquid. If it floats near the surface instead of sinking, the lye is strong enough. This test appears in later household manuals across Europe. How far back it actually goes is hard to say. In some households, especially where soap making is more than an occasional chore, the lye gets simmered over low heat to boil off excess water and concentrate it further. The result is darker, thicker, and significantly more caustic. She covers the finished lye with a weighted cloth and sets it aside. It'll keep. Now the fat. She has a large piece of raw beef tallow sitting on a board near the back of the house. Pale white, laced with bits of meat and membrane. This is what the butcher didn't want. In Northern Europe, tallow and lard were the standard soap fats. Down in the Mediterranean, olive oil took their place. Castile, Marseille, parts of Italy. Olive oil made a harder, milder soap that was traded across the continent. But olive oil doesn't grow in England or Scandinavia, so animal fat is what she has. She cuts the fat into small chunks and drops them into an iron pot hanging over a low fire. The goal is slow heat. Rush it and the fat scorches, which ruins everything. The white chunks gradually collapse into a pool of pale yellow liquid. Bits of tissue float to the surface and start to crisp. These are cracklings. She skims them off with a wooden spoon and sets them aside. She strains the melted fat through linen cloth into a clean bowl. What collects beneath is clear and golden. Once it cools, it'll harden into a firm, pale block of clean rendered tallow. Fat quality matters more than most people realize. Fresh, clean tallow makes whiter soap with almost no odor. Rancid fat still works, but the smell carries straight through to the finished bar and never fully leaves. Every woman making soap knows this. She sets the large iron cauldron over a fire pit in the open yard. This part happens outside. The fumes are sharp, and splashing hot lye on anything indoors is a disaster nobody needs. The tallow melts in the cauldron. She begins ladling in the dark lye, one scoop at a time, stirring with a long wooden paddle. The two liquids meet and the mixture hisses, letting off a thin curl of steam. At first it looks broken, greasy. The fat and the lye swirl apart from each other like they want nothing to do with one another. She keeps stirring. Wide, steady circles. This is not optional. Without constant agitation, the fat and alkali separate and the batch fails. Slowly, the mixture starts to thicken. The color shifts from a greasy yellow to a pale, creamy off-white. What a modern chemist would call saponification is happening. She just knows the soap is starting to come together. She lifts the paddle and watches the mixture fall from its edge. Early on, it runs off like water. Now it drops in slow, heavy ribbons. This is called tracing. It means she's getting close, but close isn't done. This part takes hours, sometimes most of a day. She stirs through all of it. Things that can go wrong: the lye is too weak and the mixture stays greasy and loose forever. The fire is too hot and the batch scorches on the bottom. She stops stirring too long and the whole thing splits back into layers of fat and water. Hard to rescue. Sometimes impossible. In Mediterranean workshops, soap makers would throw handfuls of salt into the pot at this stage. The salt causes the soap to curdle and rise to the surface while the dirty water, glycerin, and impurities sink to the bottom as waste. They drain off the waste and reboil the purified soap. Cleaner, harder product. She's not doing that. Northern household soap making usually skips the salting step entirely. The result is a softer soap, but it works fine for her purposes. What she does add is a handful of crushed dried lavender, stirred in near the end. Just enough to give the soap some scent. Rosemary and thyme were common too. Anything growing nearby that smelled decent. Truly perfumed soap, the kind with imported spices and fine resins. That was a luxury product made in urban workshops and sold to people with money. This isn't that. This is practical. No thermometers. No way to measure pH. She judges doneness by eye and hand, the same way her mother probably taught her. She scrapes a small amount of the hot mixture onto the paddle and lets it cool. If it sets firm and smooth with no oily sheen and no gritty patches, that's a good sign. Another test. She lets a drop fall into a cup of cold water. If it holds together as a solid bead instead of breaking apart, the batch is ready. If it disperses, she keeps stirring. She lifts the cauldron from the fire and carries it to a shallow wooden frame lined with damp linen cloth. This is her mold. Nothing fancy. A rectangular box, open on top. She pours the thick, pale soap into the frame. It flows like warm honey, steaming as it fills the mold. She smooths the surface flat with the back of the paddle. The surface glistens at first, then slowly dulls to a soft matte finish as the first skin forms. She drapes a cloth over it and leaves it in the shade to cool overnight. The next morning, the soap has set into a firm, pale slab, still slightly soft inside but solid enough to handle. She tips it out of the frame onto a flat board, peels the linen away, and slices it into bars with a thin cord pulled taut between her hands. Clean, even cuts. The bars sit in a neat row, pale, dense, faintly speckled with the tiny dark flecks of dried lavender. In cities like Marseille or Castile, professional workshops stamped their bars with a seal while the soap was still soft enough to hold an impression. A mark of origin and quality. She doesn't bother with that. She knows which soap is hers. The fresh bars go onto rough wooden shelves under the wide eaves of the house. Open air but sheltered from rain. Each bar spaced apart so nothing touches. Over the coming weeks, she turns them by hand every few days. Every side needs air. This curing period isn't just drying. The last traces of unreacted lye inside the bars are still slowly finishing their work. Use the soap too soon and it'll be harsh on skin. Give it time and it mellows. Several weeks at minimum. Longer is better. The bars shrink, lighten, harden. Their surfaces grow smoother and paler as the moisture leaves. Eventually, they're firm enough to stack without denting. She carries a finished bar to a wooden tub of heated water and pushes a pile of stained linen into it. She rubs the soap against the worst of the fabric, working up a thin, slippery lather. Not the thick foam you get from a modern bar, but it cuts grease and lifts grime out of cloth effectively. In the evening, she wets her hands at a basin near the doorway and rubs the same bar between her palms. Body soap and laundry soap were often the same product. The distinction was more about quality and availability than separate recipes. Harder olive oil soaps from the South were traded across Europe and prized for personal washing. Softer northern tallow soaps like hers were used more for laundry. But when it's what you've got, it's what you use. The remaining bars sit stacked on the shelf under the eaves, enough to carry her household through the rest of the season. Ash from her hearth, fat from her kitchen, rainwater from her yard, hours of stirring over a fire, weeks of patient drying. That's all soap ever was.